you for joining this month's Green Spotlight presentation, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI. My name is Malisha Meador, she, her, and I am the Secretary for the Green Party of Kansas City, Missouri. Diversity is one of the 10 key values of the International Green Party movement, and therefore is central to our actions, decision-making, and governing philosophy. This presentation will provide a broad range of concepts and information to illustrate and champion the importance of DEI. Part 1, Diversity. Diversity is simply all of the similarities and differences that define us as human beings. In the Green Party's description of its respect for diversity value, there is particular mention of biodiversity, that is, respect for life forms other than our own. Monoculture rarely exists in nature. That's because diversity strengthens ecosystems and makes species more resilient. We believe that every earthling has intrinsic value and plays a vital role in the balance and functioning of the natural systems and biospheres of this planet on which all life depends. There are over 8 billion people on the planet today. Diversity is not only a social benefit to strive for, it is a given. In order to peacefully coexist as a species, or as some prefer, a global human family, we must acknowledge, embrace, and adapt to the fact that there is a wide array of lifestyles, cultures, and worldviews collectively making up the human experience. We may face different challenges, but we all share a desire for love, peace, and happiness. We may have different ideas about values and politics, but we all want to live in a world without desperation and suffering. And while we all share the same limited resources, we are all facing the threat of civilizational collapse and extinction due to the human-caused climate crisis. Figuring out how to work together, meet the needs of all people, and live in balance with nature is key to our future survival on this planet. Individuals are not just one identity. They are influenced and shaped by the full range of experiences and connections they make with other people throughout their life. The term lived experience strives to represent all of these varied characteristics and influences that make up each person's identity. Of course, the big ones are age, sex, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, and race, ethnicity, and nationality. Let's discuss each of these a bit further to expand our understanding and appreciation of the diversity that humans represent. Age. Age is an important component of people's identities because different age groups have different needs and impacts on the societies in which they live. They introduce certain values to the society, such as labor rights and death with dignity. Older people are more likely to be active voters and engaged citizens. And in many countries, young people are not permitted to vote. On the other hand, younger people are generally more open to change and taking risks. Young people refresh society with new energy, skills, and ideas. They serve to both advance society forward and maintain the values and traditions of the communities that raise them. Yet both young and old face unique challenges in today's modern capitalist society. Western societies generally segregate and undervalue their senior citizens, despite the fact that elderly people have a wealth of wisdom and experience to offer their communities. Elderly people are more likely to be chronically ill, utilize hospitals, and have higher medical expenses. Elderly Americans also face challenges with financial instability, social isolation, neglect and abuse, active living, and feelings of guilt, loneliness, and fear. In the US, the elderly fit into a role-less role where they become withdrawn and disengaged from the rest of society. Young people are also facing unprecedented challenges. From starvation wages to mounting college debt, young people are burdened with financial insecurity and lack of economic opportunity. These younger generations are the first generations in American history to do worse than their parents' generation. Young people today are suffering from an addiction to technology, lack of interpersonal and communication skills, increasing mental health crisis, and the climate emergency. In sum, our young people are facing an uncertain future. When we think about ageism, we often think about it being directed at older people, but in fact, ageism has been directed across all ages. Young people are often stereotyped as spoiled, lazy, and immature, while older people may be viewed as past their prime. Both young and old people endure social exclusion and a lack of intergenerational contact with those outside of their age group. By emphasizing age diversity, we can bring people of all ages together to benefit from the diverse skills and perspectives they have to offer. Beyond that, we must start advocating for generational justice, the idea of creating a more just and sustainable world for people who have yet to be born. Let's look a little closer at generations to better understand this important concept. A generation is defined as a group of people born within a 15 to 20 year time span. These groups share significant events throughout their lifespans, which impact their thoughts, values, and actions. This is one way that social scientists can study cultural trends and changes. For example, by studying generation gaps, we can identify differences in worldviews among different age groups and work to bridge those gaps to minimize generational conflicts. Another important element of defining generations is the ability to consider those generations to come in our choices and actions to best plan for their future. You may have heard the sage axiom, wise men plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. There is a reason why Native American cultures value the seventh generation principle, the practice of making decisions today that will ensure a sustainable world at least 7 generations, 140 years into the future. It strengthens community bonds, fosters societal stability, and establishes shared values, all through being responsible ancestors. The Green Party is committed to governance based on long-termism and generational justice. Sex and gender. Sex and gender are multifaceted and not easily classified, even in nature, but especially for humans. For humans, sex is biologically and culturally dynamic, intertwined with numerous physiological and environmental influences. Sex organs alone do not indicate a person's tendencies, interests, or abilities, nor do all humans identify with the sex or gender they are assigned at birth. The term cisgender refers to a person who identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth, while transgender refers to a person who identifies with a gender other than the one assigned to them. The terms non-binary, gender fluid, and gender queer all refer to gender identities that are not exclusively man or woman. In fact, gender is much less about a person's reproductive organs and is more about the thoughts, behaviors, and traits that a person is expected to have based on their assigned sex. For example, expecting that all men are masculine and all women are feminine. There is a lot of terminology and language surrounding the subject of sex and gender, but it serves to be more inclusive of the many ways that people may describe and feel about their gender and to affirm those identities. In short, gender identity is who a person is and is part of humanity's diverse nature as a species. While gender refers to who someone is, sexuality refers to who someone is attracted to. Like gender, sexuality cannot be pinned down to biology, psychology, or environmental conditions because human sexual orientation is decided by all of these factors. While scientists have determined that there is no single gene within our DNA that explains this phenomenon, the evidence shows that genetics and hormones do play some kind of role in determining a person's sexual orientation, and orientation is certainly not a choice. Moreover, a person's sexuality cannot be determined based on outward appearance or characteristics, because not all LGBTQ people look or act the same way. Around 7%, or 23 million Americans, identify as LGBTQ. LGBTQ people are represented throughout recorded history and in all demographics. Homosexuality is not caused by childhood trauma or modeled behavior. You can't turn someone gay or manipulate their sexual orientation. While being gay is not itself a mental disorder, members of the LGBTQ community are nearly 3 times more likely to experience conditions such as major depression or anxiety due to the stigma and discrimination they endure. Studies show that LGBTQ people who are out of the closet report much higher levels of happiness. Only recently have there been significant advances in the rights of LGBTQ people, such as protections from workplace and hiring discrimination, and becoming a protected class against hate crimes. Although a 2015 Supreme Court ruling upheld same-sex marriage as a human right, 13 states still have bans on same-sex marriage, and Missouri is one of them. The Defense of Marriage Acts are legally null and void, but they perpetuate prejudice and discrimination of LGBTQ people. A minority group is a group deprived of power and privilege and is not necessarily a numerical minority. For example, women are a minority group despite making up half of the population. In fact, women are generally considered the original minority group or oppressed class. Historically, men have used sexism and a system of patriarchy to hoard power and resources and deny women equal rights. Women have been treated as inferior beings, objectified as sexual and reproductive objects, and valued as property. They have had to fight for the right to own property, serve in public office and the military, gain access to education, receive the same employment opportunities as men, establish parental rights, and even rights over their own bodies. Women are still fighting to close the wage gap and earn equal pay. Yet studies show that empowering women is the #1 way to reduce global poverty, and that women tend to score higher than men in leadership skills, tend to act more ethically, and have higher emotional intelligence, more empathy than men. Feminism is critical to creating a more just and inclusive society. In fact, feminism seeks to end all forms of domination and acknowledges the intersection of the struggles of all minority groups. A feminist approach is nonviolent and egalitarian with a focus on cooperative decision-making, which ultimately creates a better society for all. Disability. When talking with or about a person with a disability, use people-first language that does not imply the lack of something or emphasizes the disability over the person. For example, rather than describe someone as a disabled person, we would say a person with a disability. In fact, 15% of the global population and 27% of Americans live with some type of disability. Disabilities can be physical, sensory, or intellectual. Neurodiversity is a term used to explain the unique ways people's brains work. No two brains function exactly alike. Mental illness can also be considered a disability and includes a wide range of conditions from anxiety and mood disorders to PTSD and schizophrenia. Disabilities can be short-term or long-term and may be caused by a person's genetics, infectious disease, impairment or injury, and of course, individuals can have more than one disability. Religion. Religion is one of the most recognized examples of diversity within the global human family. There are over 4,000 religions in the world, and no religion is the third largest group following Christians and Muslims. Some religions believe in all-powerful gods or divine beings that control all aspects of reality in the universe. Some belief systems center around moral and ethical values, such as atheism and Buddhism. Still, other belief systems focus on treating all life forms, all earthlings, with respect. At least 34% of Americans have switched their religious affiliation during their lifetime. Yet while many religions preach about peace and brotherhood, religion is the second most common form of prejudice in the US after race and ethnicity. However, younger people tend to be less religious, and there has been a growing trend of more and more young people today identifying as non-religious. In fact, less religious people tend to be less prejudiced. We are not necessarily advocating for people to be less religious, but we are advocating for people to be more open-minded and accepting. Race. The term race attempts to describe a large, broad category of humans with a number of specific biological characteristics. However, these racial categories have little correlation to anything scientists can measure because these biological characteristics are genetically open and everyone is a hybrid of these genetic markers. There is no pure race. In fact, humans share approximately 99.9% of their genetic code with one another. A DNA test can tell you where your ancestors came from, but this is not the same as telling you what your race is. In reality, race is a social construct originating in 16th century Europe, used as a means to justify colonial expansion and slavery. Race is real because of the social impacts it creates, i.e., prejudice and discrimination. Ethnocentrism, the tendency of every group to assume that their culture is the best or that everyone thinks and acts like they do, can lead to prejudice, a fact that has been weaponized to discriminate and oppress the people of certain minority groups. In fact, the legal definition of race has changed over time in US law, as various ethnic groups have won hard-fought protections and legal status as equal members of society. Looking at this chart of race and ethnicity in the US, we are reminded that Indigenous Americans once made up 100% of this land, and now their numbers have dwindled to less than 1% of the population due to the genocide and cultural erasure inflicted on them through colonization. Native American communities are often referred to as First Nations or First Peoples to remind us of both the dignity that they possess as the indigenous people of this land and of the violence that they have suffered. Black Americans make up just 12% of the US population, yet we are all inundated with messages intended to make us feel threatened by the African American community. Furthermore, Black Americans are severely disadvantaged in regards to economic opportunity and social mobility, and are overrepresented in areas like poorer health and mass incarceration. Not all people of color experience the same levels of injustice. The term BIPOC is used to reflect the fact that Black and Indigenous people have been especially disadvantaged and harmed by systemic racism. Immigrants and non-English speakers are also systematically subjected to racism in America. In fact, the US is one of the top 10 worst countries for racial equality. This chart also reflects the difficulty and inaccuracies involved in trying to classify humans into broad groups. For starters, race, ethnicity, and national origin are distinct parts of a person's identity. They are not the same thing. Furthermore, the term race is often used incorrectly. For example, Hispanic is not a race at all. It refers to speakers of the Spanish language, not a particular country. In fact, so-called Hispanic and Latin people prefer to be identified by the specific country to which they originate or are connected. The terms Asian and Native American are other umbrella labels used to refer to a number of distinct and separate ethnicities and cultural groups. In lumping distinct cultural groups into broad and misleading categories, we miss the bigger, more diverse picture. Race is not simply black and white. Prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is an attitude, assumption, or judgment about a person simply based on that person's membership or perceived membership to a particular group. Prejudice is preconceived without any basis on actual experience or truth. Discrimination is an act based upon prejudice attitudes. The function of prejudice and discrimination is to create an us versus them mentality, integrate the majority, and justify otherwise impermissible behavior. In short, prejudice and discrimination are tools of oppression and injustice. Part 2, equity. Now that we have explored the richness of human diversity, we will now discuss the importance of empowering all people to be full participants in society, which ultimately benefits all of us. Equity is about dismantling oppression and sharing power with everyone. First, we want to clarify that equality and equity are not the same thing. Equality is when people are given the same resources and opportunities as everyone else, regardless of their circumstances. It assumes that everyone's experiences and needs are exactly the same. Equity, on the other hand, addresses structural inequalities that advantage some and disadvantage others, and instead distributes resources based on needs. This ensures everyone's ability to fully participate in a real and meaningful way. On the contrary, tokenism and virtue signaling do nothing to advance equity in our society, and in fact, can even suppress such efforts by giving an illusion of progress. Tokenism refers to those careless and superficial acts that appear inclusive of minority groups through an inadequate acknowledgement or effort intended to avoid criticism and give the false appearance of diversity or equity. It places undue burden and responsibility on the minority individual or group to represent their minority viewpoint. Tokenism does not achieve actual equity. For example, having a Black president did not bring justice to the African American community. On the contrary, Black Americans were even more economically disadvantaged at the end of the Obama administration than they were at the beginning. Another method used to obscure inequity is virtue signaling, in which an expression of an opinion or sentiment is made in effort to appear virtuous and improve one's public image. While virtue signaling implies a commitment to certain values, it can give off a holier than thou impression, and more often than not is just empty rhetoric used to pander and gain the support of specific groups, while doing little to nothing to actually empower the minority groups that they profess to support. Corporate advertising, for example, does a great job of using diverse messaging while simultaneously obscuring the systemic injustices of the capitalist economy. Another inadequate road to achieving social equity is identity politics. Also known as woke politics, identity politics is when people of a particular group form a political agenda aimed exclusively at benefiting their group. These groups promote their own interests without concern for any other group's interests, which often diminishes productive discourse, creative problem solving, and opportunities for larger political alliances. Ultimately, we know that a lot of politicians are full of empty rhetoric and are only virtue signaling to gain sympathy and voters. The Green Party supports and fights for the rights of all groups and identities. But we know that what divides us pales in comparison to what unites us. We believe that a focus on class politics, income equality, democracy in the workplace, eradicating poverty, and developing sustainable communities needs our full and immediate attention if we really want to achieve justice for all. The capitalists want to keep us divided so they can continue to rule with their wealth and power, while the vast majority of us remain exploited and oppressed workers and consumers. Unlike the inadequate tools of tokenism, virtue signaling, and identity politics, the Green Party advocates for a number of powerful tools that actually bring about a more equitable society. Accessibility is central to achieving equity because it means providing opportunities and resources to people based on their needs. From rural communities struggling with food deserts to urban communities that lack educational opportunity to older Americans having less access to technology, there are countless ways in which different groups are negatively impacted by the unequal distribution of resources in our society. We need to meet people in communities where they are at and give them what they need to thrive. The most direct method to overcome the outcomes of historic inequities is reparations. Continuing to deny the trauma that has been inflicted on BIPOC communities has proven to only reinforce and codify such inequities. Reparations seeks to lift these communities up and give them an equal economic footing so that they can thrive as equal members of society as a whole. The best example of reparations in US history is the cash payments given to the survivors and descendants of the Japanese Americans who were put into concentration camps and had their property confiscated during World War II. Germany has paid reparations for generations to Jewish survivors and descendants of the Holocaust. In short, reparations is perhaps the single most effective way to correct historical injustices. Equal pay for equal work has long been a feminist demand that extends beyond only women to many other minority groups who are paid less than their white male counterparts. The time is long overdue for this basic human right to become law. Social welfare programs include guaranteed health care, quality affordable housing, SNAP or food stamps, WIC, Social Security, Medicaid, public preschool through college education, child care services, maternity and paternity leave, and many other services aimed at helping poor and marginalized groups succeed in society. Universal Basic Income, or UBI, levels the playing field and helps all poor people. Also referred to as negative income tax, UBI guarantees everyone a certain amount of income regardless of employment status. Social scientists have studied the idea of guaranteed income and have found that few people actually quit their jobs despite receiving cash assistance. Contrary to popular belief, UBI does not make people lazier. It opens up opportunities for them to have a better work-life balance and expand their education and skills. In addition, UBI helps give women the resources they need to become financially independent and escape from abusive relationships. Ultimately, equity is about justice and the elimination of the structural barriers upholding an unfair system that disadvantages minority groups. The market will never give us tools for equity and liberation. Such tools must be mandated through legislative protections. Only the Green Party champions these policy prescriptions to address the disease of inequity in our society. Part 3, inclusion. Inclusion is a feeling and sense of belonging. While diversity can be generally measured quantitatively, inclusion must be measured qualitatively. As we mentioned previously, diversity is a given, especially in the United States. Inclusion means activating the full potential of our richly diverse culture through the empowerment and participation of every voice and perspective. Inclusion matters because we are stronger together. Bringing diverse people together introduces new perspectives that develop creative solutions. We have more tools in our toolkit and are more resilient because of it. Although America is the most diverse country in the world, we have not yet taken full advantage of this strength because we have limited the inclusion and participation of minority groups. One of the ways that the US has struggled with inclusion is through the assimilation rather than acculturation of minority groups. Assimilation is the process of minority groups adopting the practices, beliefs, and values of the dominant culture, whereas acculturation is the process of two cultures mutually exchanging ideas, behaviors, and values. This is often illustrated with the melting pot versus tossed salad analogy, in which the melting pot melds everything together into one large lump of the same substance, while the tossed salad combines a variety of ingredients that still maintain their integrity as individuals. In assimilation, immigrants and other minorities become like the majority group, and in doing so, experience a loss of customs, cultures, and identity. Through acculturation, minorities can maintain their unique identities while enjoying a sense of belonging to the wider society. In turn, society as a whole benefits from all of the resources that having a plethora of cultures and perspectives provides. Cultural appropriation is another barrier to inclusion. Cultural appropriation is harmful because it perpetuates stereotypes and takes without permission or giving credit. Of course, cultural exchange can and should be done in a positive manner. This means being respectful of the other culture by seeking to understand the significance of certain objects or elements that are meaningful to that culture. There should be a mutual sharing of ideas in a spirit of learning, celebrating, and supporting groups other than our own. In short, don't appropriate, appreciate. Microaggressions also inhibit the development of an inclusive environment. Microaggressions are insults, exclusions, and insensitive assumptions that disrespect a person's identity and expresses a prejudiced attitude. They can be intentional or unintentional. While common and inevitable, microaggressions can be minimized by recognizing our own bias and considering other people's perspectives and identities. When you do recognize a microaggression, apologize with sincerity and learn from your mistakes. In doing so, we have an opportunity for personal growth as more empathetic and open-minded individuals, which in turn helps foster inclusion. Here we will touch on several practices that can help develop a culture of inclusion. First, tolerance. Tolerance is a willingness to recognize and respect the beliefs or practices of others, even if we do not necessarily agree with those beliefs or practices. Such open-mindedness is necessary for a functional and peaceful society. We do not have to always agree in order to accept. Through tolerance, we choose to respect every person as an equal human being. Education and social experiences like travel are also important in being able to create a more inclusive world. We can use our natural curiosity to learn about other people and cultures, to expand our worldviews and empathy for others. As Mark Twain famously said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. Gender-neutral pronouns are pronouns that do not associate gender with the person. They, them pronouns are commonly used among non-binary individuals in the US, but there are many other kinds of personal pronouns. Since a person's gender and pronouns cannot be assumed based on a person's appearance, it is best to use gender-neutral language, such as the term Latinx, which is a gender-neutral way to refer to people from Latin America. Using someone's personal pronouns shows them respect by affirming their identity. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that a public event is taking place on land originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples. It's a way to honor the people who came before us and to promote initiatives that expand the diversity, equity, and inclusion of Indigenous peoples. Land acknowledgements are a demand for accountability and a call to action. Body positivity is a social movement committed to the acceptance of all bodies, no matter their size, shape, color, gender, or physical abilities. A DEI calendar is another way to celebrate diversity and create an inclusive environment. The Missouri Green Party has a great DEI calendar on our website that lists a number of environmental, social justice, and religious holidays, as well as various socialists, feminists, environmentalists, and other important activists. Visit mogreens.org and click resources to check out our DEI calendar. The most powerful tool for creating and sustaining an inclusive society is democracy. The United States, as the first modern democracy, holds a special place in the history of inclusion. We were founded on the ideals of religious freedom, free speech, and a guaranteed right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our country does not have an official language because we have always been a country of immigrants. We have the most open immigration laws in the world, and unlike other countries, we offer a path to citizenship even if you were not born here. Around the world, American democracy is a symbol of liberty and justice for all. Democracy is fundamentally about sharing power and giving every person an equal voice. Although we started out as a democracy only for white property-owning men, over the next 200 years, we fought hard to empower men without property, women, and eventually most other minority groups through voting rights. This extension of voting rights has been resisted at every turn and is not complete, but it is especially imperiled today as the legal controls restricting money in politics has been almost completely removed. This in turn has reversed centuries of progress and transformed our political system from one person, one vote to $1, one vote. Those with more financial resources now completely dominate the decision-making in the US, much as they did in 1776. This is called plutocracy, or rule by the rich, and it is radically exclusive. Unfortunately, the two political parties that have created this pay-to-play system will not bring about a return to democracy in America, as they are locked in the golden cage of their wealthy donors and cannot consider any reforms that do not maximize the power and short-term profitability of their patrons. This is why the Green Party movement is so important. Only the Green Party and its candidates refuse all donations from these wealthy elites and therefore will be public servants of their constituents and no one else, once again empowering each citizen's voice. We must resurrect our democracy if we are to create an inclusive society that takes full advantage of the power of our great diversity. That concludes our presentation on DEI. We hope you will join the Green Party in our work to put people, planet, and peace over profit. Thank you.